July 1972. A crowded diner outside Memphis. Elvis slid into a booth, sunglasses on. The young waitress froze. Minutes later she realized she'd forgotten the king's order. What happened next would follow her for life. This isn't just a story about Elvis. It's about grace under pressure. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see how a single act of kindness can ripple for decades. The bell above the door gave a sharp ting, cutting through the clatter of silverware and the low hum of a lunch crowd. It was just after noon, the kind of southern summer day where the air stuck to your skin, heavy with the smell of bacon grease and brewed coffee. Cicadas buzzed somewhere beyond the glass windows. She didn't notice him at first, just another group coming in off the highway. But when the tall man in the crisp white shirt and aviators pushed the door wide, the entire diner seemed to inhale. Heads turned, conversations dipped. It was him, Elvis Presley. Bigger than life in the tabloids, but somehow casual here, slid into a corner booth with two friends. The young waitress, barely 19 and 3 weeks into the job, froze halfway to the counter. She could feel the blood rushing in her ears. "Afternoon, sir," she managed, voice too high. She clutched her order pad like a lifeline. Elvis smiled, small, polite, and asked for iced tea. His friends ordered coffee. She scribbled quickly, nodded, and hurried toward the kitchen. Halfway there, she stopped dead. Her heart gave a hard thud. She hadn't written down his meal, not a word of it. Panic flooded her. This wasn't just any table. This was the table. She imagined the whisper spreading through the crowd. She messed up Elvis's order. She could almost hear the cook's bark, the manager's sigh. Plates clanged in the kitchen. The smell of buttered toast wafted past. She wiped her palms on her apron, forcing herself to breathe. "Just go back," she told herself. "Fix it before anyone notices." But as she turned, she realized people were noticing. A man at the counter grinned knowingly. The couple in the next booth leaned ever so slightly toward hers. Her hands trembled. And there he was, Elvis, leaning back in the booth, one arm over the seat, watching her approach. His sunglasses had slipped just enough for his eyes to meet hers. Instead of the frown she braced for, he smiled, not the practiced grin from photographs. Something softer, warmer. For a moment, the noise of the diner dulled. No clinking plates, no ringing register, just that smile, and the quiet understanding in it. She stopped at the edge of the booth, words catching in her throat. She was ready to apologize, to stumble through the explanation, but he spoke first. "Take your time, darling." Before she could even form the words, Elvis leaned back in the booth. He removed his sunglasses with one smooth motion, folding them neatly on the table. "Take your time, darling." The tension in the air shifted. The customers who'd been half watching seemed to exhale all at once. The faint rattle of the air conditioner returned to her ears, along with the hiss from the grill. She blinked, unsure if she'd actually heard him right. Up close, he didn't feel untouchable. Yes, his presence filled the room, but his tone was slow, unhurried, almost as if she were the one doing him a favor. He glanced past her for a moment, at the busboy, a boy no older than 15, wiping down a table. Elvis gave him a small nod, not the kind people give when they're being watched, but the kind that says, "I see you." The busboy froze, then smiled back. Elvis's gaze returned to her. "Busy day." Her laugh came out as more of a breath. You could say that. There was space at the end of the booth, and he gestured to it. "Sit for a second." Her first instinct was to refuse. The manager was somewhere in the back, and there were orders waiting, but something in his voice, gentle, not demanding, made her step close. She eased down just at the edge, her knees brushing the vinyl. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara." "Clara," he repeated, as if trying it out, turning it into something familiar. "What do you want to do, besides keep folks fed?" She felt her throat tight. No one had ever asked her that, in the middle of a shift. I sing, sometimes, not for anyone really." His eyebrows lifted, and he smiled again. Not the big stage smile, but one that crinkled at the edges. "Well now, that's something worth doing for someone." Her cheeks burned. She didn't know if he meant it, or if it was just polite talk. But the way he said it It felt real. For a brief moment, she forgot about the forgotten order. She forgot about the crowd's sideways glance. There was just the low hum of the diner, the faint scratch of a fork on china, the smell of brewed coffee. Then he leaned in slightly, his voice softer. "You remind me of someone," he said. Her heart skipped. "Who?" He held the pause, eyes studying hers as if deciding whether to share. The room felt smaller, quieter. Even the jukebox seemed to lower itself to a faint murmur. Finally, he opened his mouth, and just then, the jukebox clicked, cutting him off. The jukebox gave a sharp clunk, then a soft whir. A moment later, the opening notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love" floated through the diner, tinny but warm, like an old memory. Elvis's eyes stayed on hers. He began tapping the table in time with the melody, his fingertips making a gentle rhythm against the form. For a heartbeat, it felt like the rest of the world had slowed to match that beat. He finally answered, voice quiet. "You remind me of my cousin." Shy, but when it mattered, she'd step up. Clara felt her breath hitch. She didn't know what to say, so she smiled, small and unsure. The cook's voice snapped her back. "Order up." The clang of the bell over the pass-through broke the moment. She rose quickly, almost knocking her hip against the table edge. She wove through the narrow aisle between booths, balancing plates for another table. A regular at the counter leaned toward her as she passed. "Don't blow it, honey," he whispered with a wink. She rolled her eyes, but her pulse was still racing. At the grill, steam rose in thick curl. The smell of seared onions and buttered bread clung to her hair as she reached for the next order. Elvis's, 2 plates, one with a cheeseburger stacked high, lettuce crisp and edges of the cheese melted perfectly over the patty, the other a side of fries, golden and salt. She set them on a tray, and made her way back to the booth. Elvis looked up as she approached, the smile still there. She placed the plate in front of him carefully, as though it were more fragile than china. Then, without a word, he slid the plate of fries toward her, half spilling into the center of the table. "Eat," he said simply. She blinked. "I'm working." He gave a small shrug. "You've been running around. Have a She hesitated, then took one, the salt warm on her fingertips. For a moment, it felt absurd, sharing fries with Elvis Presley, in the middle of a crowded diner. The moment was short-lived. The bell over the front door jingled again. This time it wasn't a family or a group of travelers. 2 men in dark suits stepped in, scanning the room with practiced eyes. The air shifted instantly. The hum of conversation dimmed, and Clara felt her shoulders tighten. She knew without asking. Security, or maybe something more. Elvis glanced their way but didn't stop eating. Still, there was a subtle change in his posture, straightening just enough to make her notice. Through the glass, she caught movement. A small knot of people was starting to gather outside, faces pressing closer to the window. Whatever was about to happen, the easy moment they'd shared over fries, was already gone. The suited men didn't sit. They positioned themselves just inside the doorway, scanning every face in the diner. Outside, shadows moved against the glass. A teenage girl cupped her hands to the window, trying to peer inside. Another tapped on the glass, mouthing Elvis. Clara's pulse quickened. She gripped the coffee pot a little tighter as she made her way to refill cups. The sound of spoons clinking in mugs was sharper now, like every small noise had been turned up a notch. One of the men in suits leaned toward Elvis, and spoke low enough that Clara couldn't hear. Elvis nodded slightly, then caught her eye. He tilted his head toward the kitchen. "Go take 5, he murmured. She shook her head quickly. "I'm fine." He gave a small smile, but she could see the calculation behind it. The crowd outside was growing. 6 now, some with cameras, some just staring in. The glass vibrated faintly when one boy rapped on. Then, without warning, Elvis reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a pen. He slid his paper placemat closer, flipping it over to the blank side. The pen scratched quietly as he began to write. Clara hesitated by the booth, craning just slightly to see, but he kept his hand angled away from her view. At the counter, the manager leaned in toward her. "He's signing it for you, you know." Her eyes widened. "For me?" The manager just smirked. Wouldn't be the first time he's done something like that. But Clara wasn't sure she believed it. Maybe it was for someone outside. Maybe he was just jotting something down before leaving. The curiosity burned, but she didn't dare ask. The crowd outside had doubled. Some pressed their faces so close to the glass she could see the fog of their breath. A woman in a bright yellow dress waved frantically, as if the glass were the only thing keeping her from rushing in. Inside, the tension was a strange mix. Hushed but buzzed. Conversations had lowered to a murmur, yet every pair of eyes kept drifting back to the corner booth. Elvis finished writing, clicked his pen closed, and looked up at her. That same quiet smile. He folded the placemat neatly in half, then in half again. When she stepped closer to clear the table, he slid the folded paper under her palm, pressing it just enough for her to feel the corners. "Don't open it till I'm gone," he said. She looked down at her hand, then back at him. The warmth of the paper was still there, as if it had absorbed the heat of his touch. Before she could speak, one of the suited men moved to the door and opened it wide. The sound of the crowd swelled instantly, spilling into the diner. The moment the door opened, the crowd's noise rushed in. Shouts, laughter, a camera flash popping white against the glass. Elvis stood, leaving a few bills under his plate. He nodded toward Clara, sunglasses back in place now, and with the smooth ease of someone used to parting a sea of people, he and his entourage moved toward the door. The suited men stepped out first, guiding him through the tangle of arms and camera. The bell over the door jingled once, twice, and then he was gone, swallowed into the swarm outside. For a few seconds, the diner felt strangely hollow. Conversations picked up again, but softer, like the volume had been turned down. Clara stood frozen at the booth, the folded paper still under her palm. She remembered his words, "Don't open it till I'm gone." Her fingers worked at the edges, unfolding it slowly. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "Thank you, Clara. Next time you forget my order, it's on me." Her throat tightened. Taped to the note was a crisp, folded $100 bill, more than she earned in a week. A man at the counter let out a low whistle. "That's the king for you." She didn't answer. She just stared at the note. The ink strokes neat and deliberate. The way he'd written her name first, like it mattered. The paper smelled faintly of coffee, and the faint tang of pen ink. For the rest of her shift, the folded note stayed tucked deep in her apron pocket. She touched it more than once, as if to make sure it was still there. But the story didn't end with that day. A week later, according to her family, a small cardboard package arrived at the diner, addressed in block letters. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a signed 45 of Love Me 10. No flashy inscription, no elaborate flourish, just a simple line in blue ink. For the girl who kept her cool. She brought it home, showed her mother, and together they found a frame big enough to hold both the record and the folded note. It hung above her kitchen table from then on, the sunlight catching the record's grooves in the afternoons. People who visited would sometimes ask why it was there. She'd smile and say, "That's the day I learned kindness is louder than any spotlight." In quiet moments, she'd stand in front of it, running a finger lightly over the glass, hearing the faint echo of that jukebox, smelling the coffee, and remembering the look in his eyes when he told her to take her time. Decades had passed since that summer day, and the diner was long gone, replaced by a gas station and a row of storage units. But in a modest brick house on the edge of town, the framed note and record still hung above a small kitchen table. Clara's hair had turned silver, her hands a little slower, but the story never dulled. She told it only when asked, her voice soft, the details always the same. The bell over the door, the smile, the folded paper. Her granddaughter Emily had heard it more than anyone. Now in her 20s, she was a waitress herself at a cafe downtown. One evening after her shift, she found Clara in the kitchen, the smell of fresh cornbread in the air, and asked to hear it again. Clara smiled. "You sure you're not tired of it?" "Never," Emily said. As Clara spoke, Emily's eyes kept drifting to the frame on the wall. The black vinyl record caught the kitchen light, and the note, slightly yellowed now, still bore the sharp lines of Elvis's handwriting. Emily had her own stories of difficult customers, of long shifts, where nothing seemed to go right. But every time, she remembered her grandmother's words, "Kindness is louder than any spotlight." Friends who'd known Clara for decades said the moment with Elvis had changed her, not in fame or fortune, but in the way she carried herself. She never rushed anyone out of a conversation. She always found time to listen, and while most people would have sold the note and record for a quick windfall, Clara never considered it. "Some things," she'd say, "aren't for sale." When Clara passed, The funeral was small but full of familiar faces. Neighbors, friends, and a few of her old diner co-workers, now gray-haired themselves. The frame had been taken down from her kitchen and set near the front of the chapel, where guests lingered to read the note and trace the grooves of the record with their eyes. Emily stood beside it, greeting people, sharing quiet laughs and memory. Toward the end of the service, she picked up the frame and carried it to her grandmother's casket. With careful hands, she removed the note from behind the glass, folding it just as it had been folded that day and night. She slipped it into Clara's hands. "It's yours again," she whispered. Those nearby saw her smile through her tears, and in that moment, the story came full circle. Not just an encounter with a legend, but a lesson that outlived both of them. Even the smallest act of grace can echo across lifetime. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness outlives fame. Have you ever had a small act of kindness change your life?